Hello, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Prof. Jeffrey Sachs Fan World. And here is today's content. The accusation by the United Kingdom and Germany that Russia is threatening their satellites represents more than a dispute over space technology. It is a moment of profound historical symbolism, the extension of earthly rivalries into the cosmic frontier. Once humanity looked to the heavens as a realm of wonder and discovery, the ultimate domain of peace. Now, the same skies have become the newest theater of suspicion, deterrence, and fear. The event is not just about orbits and trajectories. It is about how the logic of power, that ancient struggle for dominance, has ascended beyond the Earth itself. At its surface, the accusation appears straightforward. Western defense agencies claim that a Russian satellite maneuvered dangerously close to Allied orbital assets, potentially capable of surveillance, interference, or even physical destruction. The language of threat in this context is deliberately ambiguous, reflecting both the limits of evidence and the enormity of implication. In space, proximity itself can constitute a provocation. In threatening satellites, Moscow threatens the invisible infrastructure of modern life itself. Jeffrey Sachs would likely describe this moment as the externalization of insecurity, the projection of human conflict into the very environment that once symbolized transcendence. It is a reminder that technological progress does not liberate humanity from its primal fears. It amplifies them. The sky, once a sanctuary for reason and aspiration, is now a mirror reflecting our own restlessness and distrust. As nations climb higher, they carry their rivalries upward. This incident also illustrates the evolution of warfare itself, from visible violence to invisible disruption. In the nuclear age, deterrence depended on threat of annihilation. In the digital age, it depends on uncertainty. A satellite maneuver, a data interference, a cyber signal, these now replace the bomb and the bullet as instruments of coercion. The boundaries between war and peace have dissolved into a continuous spectrum of pressure. A satellite need not fire to menace. It need only drift within reach. Its intentions unreadable, but its capabilities undeniable. This ambiguity is the essence of what strategists now call orbital deterrence, the weaponization of uncertainty. Russia, for its part, has denied any hostile intent, framing its maneuvers as routine or scientific. But in geopolitics, intent is rarely the issue. Perception is. Moscow's behavior follows a pattern familiar to students of modern strategy, the cultivation of unpredictability. By keeping adversaries uncertain, Russia multiplies its strategic value far beyond its material resources. In a world where every satellite is both a tool and a target, ambiguity becomes power. For the UK and Germany, these alleged orbital provocations touch a nerve deeper than military preparedness. They reveal a terrifying dependence. Modern civilization runs on satellites, from GPS navigation and banking transactions to climate monitoring and defense coordination. The Western world, more technologically integrated than any empire in history, is also more vulnerable. The orbital realm is its nervous system, and Russia has learned how to tap jam or disrupt it with Philosophically, this confrontation reveals the tragedy of modern power. Humanity's capacity to master the physical universe has outpaced its moral imagination. The heavens were once the domain of gods and poets. Today, they are the high ground of geopolitics. The accusation that Russia threatens Western satellites, therefore, signifies more than a security risk. It signifies a spiritual descent. We have entered an era where even the cosmos cannot escape the gravity of human ambition. Every orbit becomes a claim, every signal a potential weapon, every advancement an invitation to rivalry. Sachs might conclude that the modern world has turned the cosmos into its conscience, vast, silent, and watching, while nations replay their ancient drama of fear and pride among the stars. The accusation that Russia has threatened UK and German satellites cannot be understood in isolation. It is part of a deeper structural transformation in global power, the emergence of space as the new domain of deterrence, where visibility is both an advantage and a vulnerability. In the modern world, satellites are not symbols of prestige. They are instruments of survival. They monitor weather-managed communications, guide missiles, synchronize markets, and underpin the digital rhythm of global life. Whoever dominates orbit controls not only military vision, but also the world's nervous system. In this sense, outer space is no longer outer. It has become an extension of terrestrial sovereignty, an invisible geography of control. The UK and Germany's alarm over Russian maneuvers is thus not paranoia, but recognition. Their economies, militaries, and political systems depend on assets they cannot defend. Every satellite embodies the paradox of deterrence. It gives knowledge and coordination, yet exposes dependence. From Moscow's point of view, this dependence represents an opportunity. Unable to match NATO in conventional military power, Russia has learned to exploit asymmetry, to use unpredictability as leverage. Threatening satellites, or appearing to threaten them, achieves several strategic objectives at once. It unsettles NATO command structures, undermines Western technological confidence, and signals that no domain, not even orbit, is beyond Russian reach. It is deterrence by ambiguity, a strategy that weaponizes doubt rather than firepower. This approach is consistent with Russia's broader posture in hybrid warfare. The 21st century battlefield is no longer a place, but a network, cyber, orbital, informational. In this environment, control is not about territory, but about the reliability of perception. A disrupted satellite feed can paralyze a command center as effectively as a destroyed tank division. For the Kremlin, the ability to create uncertainty in the adversary's digital vision equals power. NATO understands this, and so the alliance's doctrines have evolved accordingly. In 2019, NATO officially declared space an operational domain alongside land, sea, air, and cyber. Yet, as Sachs might observe, declaring space a battlefield is a philosophical regression. It normalizes conflict where cooperation should have been preserved. The very institutions founded to ensure peace on Earth now extend their logic of militarization into the heavens. The result is not safety, but a widening circle of insecurity, what Sachs might call the colonization of anxiety. The deeper issue is not that Russia has developed new capabilities, but that the West has no credible, ethical, or strategic framework to restrain the weaponization of orbit. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty, a relic of the Cold War, forbids weapons of mass destruction in space, but says little about the militarization of technology. Dual-use systems blur every boundary. The same satellite that provides internet connectivity can also relay military intelligence. The same propulsion system that maintains orbit can be used for interception. In a world without moral restraint, every innovation becomes a latent threat. For the UK and Germany, the current confrontation reveals their paradoxical position, technologically advanced, yet strategically exposed. Their satellites orbit under the umbrella of US military protection, but this dependency reduces autonomy. The European Union lacks a unified space defense strategy. Its capabilities remain fragmented between commercial enterprise and national priorities. Russia understands that Europe's strength lies in its integration, and so it probes its weakest seams. Philosophically, this moment embodies what Sachs might call the surveillance paradox, a civilization that can see everything but control nothing. Humanity's vision has extended into orbit, yet our collective foresight has diminished. The power to observe has not been matched by the wisdom to govern. Each state obsessed with visibility has turned the sky into a mirror of its own insecurity. The age of surveillance, Sachs would warn, is not the age of enlightenment, it is the age of anxiety, where transparency becomes vulnerability and where the pursuit of total awareness leads to mutual blindness. Thus, the accusations against Russia illuminate more than a diplomatic rift. They expose a world drifting towards strategic schizophrenia, nations trapped between the illusion of omniscience and the reality of impotence. Space, once humanity's greatest symbol of transcendence, is now the frontier of dependence. And as the UK and Germany look upward in fear, they confront the sobering truth that the more interconnected the world becomes, the more fragile its security truly is. Space, once the domain of idealists and scientists, has now become the stage for the oldest human struggle, the pursuit of power through control of resources. What began as a quest for exploration has evolved into a global political economy of dominance. The accusation by the UK and Germany that Russia threatens their satellites must be understood not only as a geopolitical event, but as an economic inevitability, the result of decades in which the space frontier was gradually absorbed into the logic of markets, defense contracts, and state power. In the post-Cold War era, space shifted from a public good to a privatized frontier. The dream of shared human progress gave way to a scramble for orbital real estate frequencies, positions, and access to near-Earth orbits. Corporations such as SpaceX OneWeb and Amazon's Kuiper now deploy constellations of thousands of satellites, creating a digital infrastructure owned not by governments but by billionaires. This new space economy blurs the line between civilian and military use. The same satellite that connects rural schools can relay military intelligence. The same launch vehicle that delivers communications arrays can deliver surveillance payloads. Russia, witnessing this transformation, has adapted accordingly. Deprived of the vast financial resources of Western corporations, Moscow approaches space not as a marketplace, but as a battlefield of parity. Its objective is not to compete economically with the West, but to ensure that no Western monopoly in orbit becomes unchallengeable. The alleged threats to UK and German satellites fit within this strategic framework deterrence through disruption. By demonstrating the ability to interfere with Western systems, Russia reclaims leverage in a domain where it cannot compete commercially. Jeffrey Sachs would see in this dynamic the convergence of capital and fear. Space, he might argue, has been militarized not because of necessity, but because of profit. Each advance in surveillance, propulsion, or satellite networking creates both an economic opportunity and a security dilemma. Defense industries thrive on insecurity. Every perceived threat justifies another wave of investment, another contract, another deployment. The cycle becomes self-sustaining fear, generating profit, and profit reinforcing fear. What was once the frontier of cooperation now operates under the same principles that define terrestrial arms races, accumulation, deterrence, and moral decay. The United States and its allies have long presented space dominance as a matter of national security, but it is equally a matter of industrial policy. Billions flow annually into aerospace conglomerates that fuse public funding with private ownership. The militarization of orbit thus becomes a structural feature of the global economy, a vast network of interests that makes demilitarization almost unthinkable. In this world, the accusation of aggression is often indistinguishable from competition over markets and contracts. For Russia, targeting or shadowing Western satellites is not simply aggression, it is communication. It signals that no technological monopoly is permanent, that vulnerability exists even in the heavens. But beneath that message lies an admission of decline. Unable to match the West's technological and economic power, Moscow wields threat as its currency, the politics of asymmetry turned into spectacle. By turning satellites into pawns, Russia transforms its weakness into influence. The deeper tragedy, Sachs would insist, is that humanity has learned to replicate its earthly systems of inequality beyond the earth. The cosmos, once imagined as the common heritage of mankind, has become another realm of enclosure divided by patents, militarized by nations, and commodified by corporations. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty envisioned a future of shared stewardship. What has emerged instead is a cosmic oligarchy where the same few powers and companies that dominate Earth now dominate orbit. Economically, this has created a dangerous dependency. The digital and financial systems of the global economy rely on satellites owned by a handful of actors. If those satellites are compromised, whether by accident hacking or hostile interference, entire markets could collapse within hours. Thus, every satellite launched becomes both a tool of progress and a potential instrument of catastrophe. Philosophically, Sachs might call this the moral inversion of technology. Humanity designed machines to expand its freedom, but now lives in fear of their fragility. We are governed not by reason, but by systems we can no longer control. The militarization of space is therefore not just a failure of diplomacy, it is a failure of imagination. We extended our reach into the stars, but carried our corruption with us. Economically, this has created a dangerous dependency. The digital and financial systems of the global economy rely on satellites owned by a handful of actors. If those satellites are compromised, whether by accident hacking or hostile interference, entire markets could collapse within hours. Thus, every satellite launched becomes both a tool of progress and a potential instrument of catastrophe. Philosophically, Sachs might call this the moral inversion of technology. Humanity designed machines to expand its freedom, but now lives in fear of their fragility. We are governed not by reason, but by systems we can no longer control. The militarization of space is therefore not just a failure of diplomacy, it is a failure of imagination. We extended our reach into the stars, but carried our corruption with us. To understand Russia's perceived threat to Western satellites, one must look not to the skies, but to the underlying psychology of power. Russia's moves in orbit, whether actual or strategic provocations, are part of a deliberate language of defiance, a signaling exercise meant to remind the West that deterrence remains mutual even in a domain the West once considered its own. Moscow's actions are more than mere technical maneuvers. They are political statements encoded in the silence of space. At first glance, Russia's behavior may seem reckless, a symptom of desperation amid economic sanctions, battlefield tensions, and diplomatic isolation. Yet it would be a mistake to dismiss these actions as mere impulsiveness. For the Kremlin, strategic ambiguity is a means of survival. When direct parity with NATO is not possible, unpredictability becomes a strength. Every orbital maneuver, every close flyby of a Western satellite is designed not to destroy, but to destabilize, to sow doubt in the minds of adversaries and force them to calculate costs they cannot clearly see. Jeffrey Sachs might interpret this as a policy of external insecurity. A country under internal pressure seeks reassurance through external show. Russia's satellite behavior thus reflects its internal situation, a mix of weakness and show fear and bombast. The Kremlin understands that its military capabilities cannot match the industrial might of the United States or the technological reach of Western corporations. But it also knows that perception can compensate for strength. If Russia can convince the world that it possesses both capability and resolve, it will achieve deterrence through illusion, a form of psychological balance in a materially unequal world. From a geopolitical perspective, these orbital moves also serve as a tactical narrative. By framing its actions as defensive, a response to Western surveillance, cyber intrusions, and encirclement, Moscow positions itself as the aggrieved party, not the aggressor. Russian state media portrays Western satellite constellations, especially those supporting Ukraine's defense, as legitimate military targets. This narrative reframes Russia's provocations not as escalation, but as restoring balance. In the Russian mind, space is no longer neutral territory. It is an extension of the battlefield. The West itself has opened up, yet there is a calculation behind this confrontation. Russia understands that Western alliances depend not just on force, but on consensus. Every disruptive act, from cyber attacks to satellite interference, tests that consensus. Will NATO respond collectively, or will the fear of escalation tear the alliance apart? Moscow's goal is rarely to win militarily. It is to divide politically. The British and German accusations thus become part of a larger choreography of tension in which Russia reminds Europe of its proximity, power, and unpredictability. This is the essence of strategic signaling, the use of limited, ambiguous actions to communicate broader intentions. The manipulation of satellites, like the shuttering of NATO aircraft or the cyber intrusions into Western infrastructure, follows the same logic. Demonstrate capabilities, sow confusion, and force negotiations on Russia's terms. It is deterrence as theater, an old art practiced in a new medium. In philosophical terms, Sachs might describe this as the tragic symmetry of fear. The West fears Russian aggression. Russia fears encirclement by the West. Each side sees its actions as defensive, its military buildup as preventive, its signaling as necessary. The result is a feedback loop of insecurity, a system where every precaution deepens the very danger it seeks to prevent. What began as deterrence becomes dependence on deterrence. Fear becomes the only language both sides understand. But within this vicious circle lies a darker truth, the erosion of meaning. When every action is both defensive and provocative, when every satellite is both a tool and a weapon, language itself collapses. The distinction between peace and conflict dissolves into a state of perpetual vigilance. In this sense, the British and German accusations are not simply a warning against Russia. They are also an admission that humanity has entered an era where danger is permanent, invisible, and self-sustaining. Sachs might warn that such a system cannot last forever. A world dominated by interconnected signals. In this world, weakness disguises itself as defiance, fear masquerades as confidence, and technology, meant to bring clarity, becomes the instrument of confusion. Russia's satellites may orbit in silence, but they speak a language. We all understand that, of power-seeking reassurance and humanity once again mistaking escalation for stability. The accusations against Russia, the satellites maneuvering in the silent void, the nervous chatter of governments about threats in orbit, all of this taken together marks a turning point in human civilization. We have carried our rivalries into the sky. The heavens, once the symbol of transcendence, have become the mirror of our fears. What should have been humanity's shared triumph, the conquest of space, has become the latest frontier of division. Jeffrey Sachs would describe this moment as the descent into the heavens. The irony is profound. We rise technologically, yet fall morally. Our rockets climb higher, but our imagination remains earthbound. The accusation that Russia is threatening Western satellites is not merely an event in geopolitics. It is the revelation of species that cannot escape itself. The sky has become an extension of the human condition, restless, ambitious, afraid. When the United States, Russia, and their allies first entered space, they spoke of peace and exploration. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty declared that the cosmos should remain the province of all mankind. That phrase embodied the moral optimism of an era that believed science could lift humanity beyond war, but that optimism has vanished. The great powers now interpret the province of mankind as another territory to be secured, exploited, and patrolled. The ideal of collective stewardship has been replaced by the logic of preemption. Sachs might remind us that this is not a technological failure, it is a philosophical one. The militarization of orbit reflects a deeper moral collapse, the inability to imagine cooperation without domination. Every nation now sees space through the lens of insecurity as a domain where the absence of control equals the presence of danger. The result is a tragic inversion of purpose. What was built to connect humanity now divides it further. Satellites designed to map weather, monitor crops, and study climate have become instruments of espionage and strategic signaling. The scientific heavens have turned into the political battlefield. The moral implications extend far beyond military risk. The same technologies that could unite the world in shared stewardship of the planet, environmental monitoring, global communication, real-time observation, are instead feeding a world of suspicion. The sky, once a metaphor for hope, now reflects the failure of trust. The global commons has become a chessboard where no one wins and every move invites retaliation. Philosophically, Sachs would frame this as the final stage of the Enlightenment paradox. Humanity's mastery of nature has outpaced its mastery of self. We have conquered gravity, but not greed. We can map galaxies, but not our own conscience. The space age promised transcendence, a civilization no longer bound by the constraints of earthly conflict. Instead, we have reproduced those conflicts in orbit, proving that progress without ethics is merely expansion without meaning. There is also a spiritual dimension to this tragedy. In older civilizations, the sky was sacred, a symbol of unity and divine order. To look upward was to be reminded of one's smallness, to encounter the infinite. Today, to look upward is to see surveillance weapons and corporate logos orbiting the planet. The heavens no longer inspire reverence, they inspire strategy. Humanity, in its arrogance, has not merely reached for the stars, it has colonized them with its fear. Yet within this moral collapse lies a faint possibility of redemption. Sachs often argues that crises, when fully seen, can become catalysts for consciousness. The militarization of space may yet awaken a new moral urgency, a recognition that survival depends not on control but on cooperation. The same satellites that now serve as tools of deterrence could, if reimagined, become instruments of shared knowledge, mapping climate change, preventing conflict, and bridging humanity's divisions. But this transformation will require more than policy. It will require humility. Nations must learn to see the cosmos not as a stage for dominance, but as a sanctuary for stewardship. Humanity must rediscover the wisdom that progress without restraint is regression disguised as victory. Jeffrey Sachs would end such a reflection not with despair, but with a warning shaped like hope. The heavens will not save us from ourselves. They only reflect what we have become. If we fill the sky with weapons, we will look upward and see our own fear circling the earth. But if we fill it with trust, we may finally see what we once believed it to be, the light of a shared future.